All right, with our hair canvas installed into the vent, into the back, we can now sew our center back seam. So go ahead and take your two back panels, put right sides together, and line up your center back seam. And pin it together. Once you're all pinned together, go to the sewing machine and you're going to stitch it at a 1/2 inch. Okay, your hair canvas should be trimmed far enough away from the so that when you stitch, that you won't be catching the hair canvas in your stitching into the seam allowance. It should be just outside of it. You don't want it trimmed too far away, so you only want about a 16th to an eighth away from where you're stitching. So stitch your center back seam and stitch all the way down to the top of your vent. Okay. Now once you get towards the top of your vent, you want to have marked where your seam allowance ends. You can see it's marked a 1/2 inch down. Okay. I'm going to stitch right to that point and I'm going to back tack it there. Okay. But I'm not going to stop. I'm going to get back to that point. I'm going to put my needle down, lift my foot up, and I'm going to stitch out to the back or to the outside of the vent. Okay. Now these stitches may come out later when we put the lining in, but for now I just want it held together. There we go. Now another place I'm going to stitch, I'm going to do a large stitch. So I'm going to set my machine to the biggest stitch possible because this is going to come out later. I'm going to continue stitching down where if there was no vent, it would just be a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay. So I'm going to stitch down there. And what this will do, it'll make it easier to press my vent to one side. Again, I'm using a larger stitch that I can take out later. It will be easy to take out, okay? So I have my machine, my stitch length set to a gathering stitch. And I'm not back tacking at the beginning or end of this because it is coming out. All right, again, this is just to make pressing easier. And then later, before I install my lining, I'll take this out. So once I've stitched it, I'm now going to press my seam allowance open. Here you can see that my hair canvas doesn't get caught in the seam allowance. That's what it's showing there. And now just press your seam allowance right open. And I'm going to press this open all the way down to the vent. And once I get down close to my vent, I'm going to clip in right into that corner where my vent stitches go in towards the, make the L out on the vent. And I'm clipping right into my stitching there, okay? To it, but not through it, all right? So I'm not clipping through my stitching, I'm clipping right to it. What that does, it releases my center back seam, so I can press that open, but my vent can still lay to one side. So make sure you clip really well right in there and press that seam open and make sure it's clipped right to the stitches or you won't be able to get a good press. And again, this is so that your center back seam can be pressed open and your vent can lay to one side. There we go. Now, once you've done that, press your vent to one side, okay? So remember, we stitched this closed to make it easier to stitch, or to press rather. And make sure your fabric is pulled tight in opposite directions on either side of that seam. And give it a good press to one side. Now that we're done pressing it, we're going to go back up to the top and we're going to catch stitch our seam allowance to our hair canvas. And we'll do this on both sides of the center back. Okay, so again, this is just done where the hair canvas is, and we're catching that seam allowance down to the hair canvas. This will keep the seam allowance nice and flat, and when we do that, it actually helps reduce the bulk because the seam allowance can't bunch up or flap to one side, or anything like that. It will just be catched down nice and flat to our hair canvas. And we'll do that on both sides. So just catching the seam allowance to the hair canvas, and that's it. And once you finish catching the seam allowance down, you're done. Your back is ready to be sewn to the front panels. So we can sew side seam and shoulder seams, and that will be in the next video. So we're getting close.